Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Jonathan Thurston, Director of Digital Accessibility for Walmart's Accessibility Center of Excellence. I'm a white male with brown hair, wearing a t-shirt that says progress over perfection. I also have ADHD. This is a topic that I'm super passionate about. Maturity models are a game-changing strategy for helping organizations to truly understand where they are and what they need to do next. And we're going to talk about that. There's so much to discuss. I'm here with my friend and colleague, James Thurston, and we are looking forward to sharing everything we know about maturity models.
Thank you, Jonathan. This may be the first time we've actually done a session like this together, and it's strange hearing our same last names. We're not related as far as we know, but we do both really love working with maturity models to drive progress in all kinds of organizations, progress on accessibility. So I'm James Thurston. I am the Accessible Digital Transformation Lead at Atos here in North America. I'm part of our digital workplace practice, and so working with our customers and partners on a whole range of accessible digital solutions for the workplace. Like Jonathan, I have loved working with, even creating and building maturity model tools. I work with all kinds of different types of organizations, companies, cities, universities, in using these maturity model tools, and there's a lot of them out there. Using these tools to understand where they are and drive progress based on a really robust and detailed understanding of where they are. So we're super excited. I've been working with these tools for, I don't know, maybe eight or 9 or 10 years. And our goal for this session is, I think it's pretty straightforward. We really are hoping that all of you in this conversation with us today are as excited or become as excited and see the real power of these maturity model tools, and even get interested in, hopefully, in using a tool for your organization or joining in the use of a tool as another organization might be assessed and being a part of a team. And we'll talk sort of about that process as well.
Absolutely. And James, I hope this is not the last time we talk together as well. We've been friends for many, many years. Again, you know, it's nice to have a colleague that's just as passionate about accessibility and inclusion. And this topic around maturity models. I mean, one of the things we want to talk about today is help companies and organizations to truly understand the maturity model process and how it is a proven framework for launching new accessibility programs. Today's discussion is about digging into how organizations use these new tools and frameworks, like maturity models, to evaluate and benchmark their accessibility processes, strategies, and operations. These tools, we've seen them firsthand, impact the way organizations approach accessibility and inclusion. And we're so happy, again, to be able to talk about how that works, why it works, and when organizations can really use these frameworks to help grow and propel their programs forward. It's a holistic view of accessibility. This is one of the things I truly love about the maturity model process. It's looking at accessibility holistically. It's not just looking at fixing the bugs. It's not just looking at culture. It's looking at all these different pillars around accessibility to create, again, that universal baseline to help you measure and track your progress. James.
So yeah, the way that we've sort of designed this conversation, and we are really hoping it is a conversation between the two of us, but also ultimately with all of you, is to look in a few different ways at maturity models. Sort of what we're using for shorthand, the why, the what, and the how. So before we get into a discussion of what makes for a good maturity model tool and process, it's probably good to level set a little bit first on why. Why would an organization undertake one of these pretty comprehensive looks at where they are today and where they could be tomorrow on accessibility and digital inclusion? So the last few years, as we all know, and we all talk about, have really accelerated the digital transformation of our world, of companies, of sectors, of regions of the world. And I think really made a lot more obvious, more apparent why all of our organizations need to be doing better on accessibility. When a good friend of probably all of ours, many of ours, Karen Tamley, with whom I had done a maturity model assessment when she was at the city of Chicago, early on in the pandemic, she said something that has stayed with me. and really helps me think about the power of these accessibility maturity model tools. She said that crises and disasters, things like the pandemic, really make glaringly apparent things we already know. And we know that we're not doing well enough collectively on accessibility, and that we have an opportunity and an imperative to do a lot better to make our workplaces even more accessible. So, Jonathan, I've worked with you on maturity model assessments in the past, and really impressed with how you're leading efforts today at Walmart to use these tools. But can you talk a little bit about why when you went to Walmart, as you've been building out teams and colleagues there across the company, why you think it's important to get the new Accessibility Center of Excellence there involved at driving maturity model work?
It's a very powerful tool, right? So within our complex business, it's often hard to establish where we are with accessibility, where we are on that journey, and how we truly compare across the market, right? With a maturity model process, we get a holistic evaluation of our progress across various functions like procurement, training, standards, etc. It's a new baseline to benchmark our current levels of accessibility against. Establishing that baseline is key and very difficult to do. It's a custom framework for developing new roadmaps and strategies to scale inclusion across our enterprise. One of our biggest challenges is scale and impact because we're so large. Maturity model allows us to approach that in a very smart, proficient manner. So James, it's clear you have a passion for accessibility and inclusion and maturity model tools, and you have led multiple assessments across very different types of organizations, cities, universities. Why? What's the value that you see, James, in the maturity model process?
Sure. And I've really admired being able to work with you a bit on the maturity model process there at Walmart that you're helping to lead. So we'll talk a little bit about process and substance of these tools. And I think the value and the impact comes not from one or the other, but really from both. Both what is the tool and how do you use the tool? Yes. So Jonathan, you talked some already a little bit about what the tools tell you. I think one of the most important benefits that I've seen, and I've probably done dozens of these assessments of different kinds of organizations over the years. I've worked with partners to create suites of these assessment tools. And I really do think that one of the benefits I see from these is how it really gets different leaders and managers and departments in a company or a university or an organization, really gets them on the same page and understanding their approach to accessibility. A lot of times, I think different people in a company, different departments of big companies or organizations, they don't necessarily understand where they are today in the same way. So really for what I've seen in doing these assessments with maturity model tools is often for the first time, it's getting them all in either in the virtual room together or the real room together to think about all of these different variables that define an effective and mature approach to accessibility and inclusion. And that, to me, is a huge win right there, just getting people on the same page and in the same room.
That's often one of the largest challenges to scale efforts like this now,
right?
To bring a consensus. Right? So
another reason why inevitably these assessments lead to both insights that you might expect to see and ones that are a bit surprising is the kind of builds on bringing these people together. Chris Misra, who he's the CIO at the University of Massachusetts, and we in the past did a maturity model assessment with the University of Massachusetts. He talked about how the process of applying these tools at the university, a big organization, lots of departments, very decentralized, but it really helped them, that process, to provide a lot greater focus on underlying issues that were really holding them back across the university, holding them back from making improvements. And so as a result, they ended up putting a lot more focus on things like accessibility as part of their approach to blended learning at the university, and taking some real concrete steps around captioning in PowerPoints and in Zoom, for example, that were incredibly helpful in driving inclusion at the university. So ultimately, I've seen companies and organizations of all kinds use these, the outputs, the results of these maturity model assessments. And again, we'll talk in a minute about the different kinds of tools, what they all have in common. But I've absolutely, and Jonathan, I think you have as well, seen companies and organizations use the results of these assessments to really drive real change, and use this process to raise awareness across the organization with senior executives, with line managers. And by change, I mean things like, I've certainly seen organizations that I've worked with maturity model tools end up investing more in staff and resources focused on accessibility in a transformational way, creating actual policies around accessibility and governance systems to implement those policies as a result of elevating a focus on accessibility. And Jonathan, I know you and I have talked about how these governance systems, we need to be looking at accessibility the same way we look digital accessibility, the same way we look at privacy and security of information technology. And I've certainly seen the maturity model process lead to that kind of governance system that elevates the importance of accessibility in an organization. We've seen organizations change how they buy and deploy technology with a much more of a focus on accessibility as part of the procurement process. So I mentioned Chris Misra from the University of Massachusetts. Another great learning that I like to talk about in terms of the why of these maturity model tools and why we would use them, is that he talked a lot when we worked with him on an assessment about how across the university, and this probably resonates with you at Walmart and some of the organizations you're familiar with, certainly that I've been familiar with. I don't think it's unique to the University of Massachusetts, but how within that large organization, there were these pockets of heroic effort. That's what he called them.
Right.
You know, it's a person doing great things in that department, but with no way to scale that best practice. And what I saw with that organization and others is really using the maturity model process to shine a spotlight on those pockets of heroic effort, a term that I love because it really is oftentimes, and then find a way to scale those efforts across an organization.
Excellent.
So lots of reasons for why we would want to use these. You know, I think, and there's probably a lot more, but maybe we can start talking a little bit, Jonathan, about the what, and start digging into maturity model tools and what we mean by them. As I mentioned, and Jonathan, as you know, there's a lot of different tools out there. I don't know that we're here to endorse one or the other, but I think we can think about some similarities across good maturity model tools for accessibility.
There are multiple versions of the models in the market. We are not here promoting one specific model, but as you know, part of the disability community, we want options. And thankfully, we do have different types of options around running these types of exercises and models. And I would encourage anyone, and I can come back to this later, who's interested in running maturity models to research and look at the different examples out there and find the best fit for your organization.
Absolutely, and really feel free to reach out to me and to Jonathan as well. Like I said, we've been involved with a lot of tools. We've built these maturity model tools and used them, but they're typically a function of substance, these dimensions or variables that are being examined as or the focus of a maturity model assessment. Yep. And levels of maturity that kind of apply to each of these dimensions or variables. Typically, the levels of maturity for any kind of maturity model tool are going to be a scale of 1 to 5. So, Jonathan, based on some of your experience using different tools and maybe even your experience now with Walmart, can you share some thoughts now on these dimensions and the variables, the substance of what an accessibility and inclusion maturity model might focus on?
I would love to. And again, just want to go back to the point I was making before about maturity models are a holistic approach to accessibility. It's not just focusing on one facet or one aspect or pillar of accessibility. It's a sort of really well-rounded view. And I truly believe this is the right approach to accessibility. You can't just fix the bugs and be done with it. If you fix the bugs, you're going to be fixing the bugs forever. This is a framework that allows you to get out of that vicious cycle. So maturity models are often composed of different types of pillars around accessibility. And what's interesting, and from my experience of working for multiple different companies, helping them to build accessibility programs from the scratch, basically, from nothing to something, these pillars are extremely important, right? And what's interesting too is that often you see there's these certain themes that flow through even different types of organizations, even cities and universities. There's holistic sort of pillars around accessibility. And we can go through and talk about some of those right now. People and culture. You need to work on people and culture as part of your accessibility approach. You can't do it without people, right? And you need to shift your culture so that your company and organization understands that accessibility is something to be embraced. It's part of who we are, and it's part of the current and future workplace. We need to shift our culture to embrace accessibility and embrace our differences as well. And there's a whole pillar around that with this model. Vision, strategy, engagement. This is one of my favorite parts as well. I love strategy and I love the vision around working towards a more inclusive world, right? But how do you even start to track that? How do you even measure that, right? The maturity model gives you a framework to build a baseline around a pillar like that. What about investments?
And John, actually, before, if I can just jump in before going on to investments, on the vision piece, I also love it. And obviously, it's a critical part of any organization, big or small, regardless of sector, of having kind of different types of strategies. There's ideally an accessibility strategy. It could be part of a larger DEI strategy, which is great. Adding accessibility in there, that's a great outcome as well. But even as part of the strategy, thinking about how do we align our focus, our commitment to accessibility as a company or organization or employer with our business strategy as well, and making sure that those are complementary and supporting each other, and finding the competitive advantage a lot of times for companies in being more accessible, whether that's attracting more talent or more customers.
Brilliant. I couldn't agree more. And again, that vision and strategy is going to be unique for every different organization. Again, there's themes, right? But you have to customize it for the ways of working and the way that company or business or organization works, right? So the vision and strategy is going to always be different, right? So investments, investing money and resources towards achieving success around inclusion, right? This is a huge pillar to measure. If you have no investment, what are you doing? No.
It's super easy to have, I think, on paper, and we've both seen this as participating in multiple different maturity model assessments, to have great documentation. We've got a policy, we've got a governance system, great processes for how we're buying and deploying technology. But if you're not actually investing and supporting that, then there's going to be a problem. And what's beautiful, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about the levels of maturity, that if that investment's not there, regardless of what the variable is, it could be training, it could be procurement, it could be communications and accessible communications channels. There's lots of different variables in these tools. If the investment's not there to support it, then you're going to end up with on the lower end of the 1 to 5 scale for maturity.
Absolutely. There's a ripple effect across the rest of the different pillars as well, right? Investment can be things like building an accessibility team, investing in the community, investing in tool sets, investing in training. I can go on and on and on, but these are key sort of parts of running a successful accessibility program. And without that investment, it's extremely difficult.
And Jonathan, on the investment piece, sorry for jumping in. I think of the many different assessments of different organizations that I've been a part of, I think just about all of them have successfully used the process, and then the output, which we'll also talk about in a minute, the output of that process, which is a set of scores and recommendations to drive increased investment, because you've got literally a roadmap that tells you how to mature your processes for accessibility. It makes it easier to make the case for increased investment.
What a brilliant point, right? Because you can't get investment without buy-in from leadership, right? And if you're struggling to get that buy-in, to get that investment, the maturity model is an excellent tool to showcase the need for that investment, not only with your associates, but with your customers too, right? Again, I love the maturity model and its holistic approach, right? We can talk about another pillar around standards, right? How mature is your organization around developing your own version and flavor of accessibility standards, right? We have brilliant standards we can lean on across the industry, global standards, right? But how does your organization interpret those standards? Do you have a source of truth around how to follow and implement those specific standards? That's something that is a sign of maturity and also helps to enable accessibility across the organization. Without that, right, whose standards do you follow? Who do you listen to? What sort of process do you align with, right? So standards are extremely important as well, and a huge sign of maturity.
And really, where do those standards, where are they being used? As you're talking about, are you aware of the relevant standards? And this could be for digital accessibility or built environment accessibility as well. Right. But are you incorporating them into your design guides? Are you incorporating those standards into your procurement processes?
The design system, right? Your marketing materials, right? The way you build your product creation life cycle.
So each of these categories of just for people who aren't as familiar with maturity model tools, each of these categories that Jonathan's leading us through, it's possible to have one or even a few very discrete variables very relevant to each of these categories: people and culture, vision and strategy, investments, standards. It's not just possible, it's critical really to have discrete variables that can be assessed and scored around each of those. Sorry, Jonathan, jump back in.
No, I love to, the way I think of these pillars is they're multifaceted. In fact, the pillars themselves is an example of being multifaceted, right? But each one of these pillars has distinct different parts to it, right? That's a good segue to training, support, and tools, right? That pillar alone holds 3 different sort of aspects to it. And each one of those aspects has different sort of variables to look at to and explore. Training, for example, does your organization offer accessibility training? How do you go about approaching accessibility training? Do you have resources internally, subject matter experts who can provide that training? Do you partner with other organizations to help you implement that training inside? There's multiple different strategies. And we're not here to say what's right or wrong, because every organization is different, right? What we're here to say is you should have training. You should help figure out mechanisms to create awareness around this super important topic, right? And it's a signal. If you don't have training, that sends a signal, right? And it's something we can measure.
And Jonathan, on the training, I think that the organizations that I'm familiar with, that I've worked with over the years that have advanced the furthest, I would say, think about training, as you said, in a very multifaceted way. So obviously training around accessibility for your IT professionals, developers and designers, but your procurement officials need training on disability, on accessibility. Your communications people need, both for internal communications for employees and external communications, need training on accessibility and, of communications, both the content and the channels that your company or organization deploys that content on. So it really is a comprehensive look at role-based training and what do these different roles in a company or organization need to know for that role related to accessibility and disability.
Yep, and the maturity model can help you map out those different efforts and training if they exist, whether they exist or not, and how impactful they are too. You mentioned procurement. This is one of my favorite pillars. So the procurement, looking at the procurement of your organization. Do you pay attention to products and services that you're procuring and whether they embrace accessibility or not, whether they're accessible or not? What does that process look like? Again, if there is no process like that, that sends a signal, right? And there's multiple ways to roll out a process around accessible procurement. Ultimately, I would say that you want your new partners that you're onboarding to become part of your organization to be accessible, right? Now, it's an interesting sort of discussion because not every company is accessible, of course, yet. They have to be, but not yet. It's a journey. right? So sometimes you do have to make a negotiation with the business in the procurement process. So if a company is not fully accessible, quote, yet, the procurement process is an opportunity to encourage that future partner to work towards becoming accessible. You can mandate that they commit to accessibility and perhaps share their roadmap to achieve alignment with the standards and over a certain amount of time, right? This is the power of the procurement process. If your partner's products and services are not accessible, who's going to fix it, right? So you want to have that conversation up front before you get into business together, right?
And really, for again, for each of these kind of categories of variables that we know are drivers of increasing accessibility and digital inclusion, a really strong maturity model tool, as you're looking at various tools, will have each of these categories sort of broken out into component parts. So with procurement, looking at the use of standards, looking at training your procurement officials, looking at how you communicate and work with your vendor ecosystem on accessibility. There's a lot nested in there, as Jonathan's been describing, and not just for procurement, for each of these higher level categories of maturity model variables.
And just procurement being its own pillar on its own gives you the idea of how important that is to that truly holistic vision, right? So the next one we're going to talk about is also one of my favorite pillars. It's around the product development lifecycle. How do you build your products and services, right? Every company does it different. I've worked at many different companies that have very different types of product development life cycles, right? But one thing I've noticed is there's always the opportunity to inject accessibility into that life cycle. And of course, as most of us on this call know, injecting accessibility, considering accessibility at the beginning of the process, shifting left, is one of the most powerful things you can do. If you address accessibility at the beginning, throughout the whole process, you don't end up with an experience that's inaccessible that you have to fix later. And I'll tell you, and as many people on this call also probably know and have lived, fixing it later, retrofitting it, remediating it is a huge pain. And it's extremely expensive. It's very inefficient when if you had just approached it from the beginning through the end, you don't have to worry about that so much, right? So this is an interesting one, James. Sales, marketing, and communication. This is something that's measured on maturity models as well. Why do we measure marketing and sales? Why do we look at the communication, right, of a company or organization? Well, the maturity model measures how accessibility is approached. Is your marketing message accessible? Are your communications to your customers and associates accessible, right? Is your sales deck, your sales pitches accessible? It's extremely important as part of your image and growth to make sure that these components embrace accessibility as well. If you send out a marketing message that's inaccessible, it's also telling the world that you are a company that's inaccessible. It's an extremely important pillar to measure against. And, you know, it's a journey, right? This is one thing we have to remind everyone, this is a journey. But what the maturity model does is it shows you where you are on that journey. And we're going to dig into this a little bit more soon, but how you can grow to that next level of maturity once your baseline has been established. So James, within these key dimensions, you know, are there any that you would like to focus on in the assessment part?
Sure. So there's obviously they're all important, each of these dimensions and the kind of sub variables under them, which, as we mentioned, can be different across different maturity model tools. Obviously, they're all important. I think you, Jonathan, you said most of them were your favorite, which tells you sort of how important they are, which is great. I love that.
What's my favorite is that holistic view, looking at all the different parts and how they fit together.
So I won't pick favorites of our children, but I will say that in the assessments that I've led across different kinds of organizations, there often are times where it seems like the expert teams that I put together to do these assessments are spending a lot of time in interesting discussions in some of these areas, in some of these variables. And I'll mention a few of them in particular. One is metrics, measurement. Does the organization, does the company, is it using numbers? Is it taking a quantitative approach to understanding across all of these variables how it's doing when it comes to supporting accessibility and inclusion? So that could be metrics for procurement. And one of the best organizations that I've seen when it comes to procurement of accessible technology is a university here in the United States, where I'm based. And they knew that 80% of their procurements were referencing relevant accessibility standards, and they knew why the other 20% weren't. And there were some reasons why, but they knew why. Some departments were sort of exempted. I think it was sports and research were exempted out of having to comply with the university policy on procurement and accessibility because they brought in so much money. But they had those numbers down. They knew how many of those vendors were submitting VPATs or some other kind of conformance statement. They knew how many of those were engaged with an IT professional to get more information on. So metrics across the board could also be for your training activity, your communications, but really spending a lot of time focused on the measurement of each of these variables is always seems to be a big part of the conversation. Leadership and budget, you also mentioned, you can't really get past these pockets of heroic effort without leadership support and budget support. And so those also, I guess, would be sort of favorites, or certainly areas where I know in the assessments that I've done, the variables in those areas we spend a lot of time focused on. But really, they're all critical variables. And what's important about these variables, and I've developed and used several of these tools over the years, is as you're looking at maturity model tools, if you start to evaluate some, the variables have to be really well defined and discrete. They can't be mushy and a lot of overlap. If you want to be able to assign scores on a range of 1 to 5, the variables have to be super well defined, crisp, with one aspect that they're looking at a time. Otherwise, it becomes hard to distinguish one variable from another, and you can't really do that kind of assessment, Jonathan, that you're talking about and have done, where you can identify those discrete blockers and then figure out strategies to attempt them. So as you're evaluating your own maturity model tools that you might want to use, make sure that both the variables are well defined and those 5 levels of maturity for each of the variables are also well defined.
Those well-defined variables ultimately provide clarity, which is what a really solid maturity model sort of program can provide to you. There's a lot of fuzziness in this space, right? And what we're trying to do is shine a light and create an accurate sort of assessment of where we are. And that's super important, because we need to be able to understand where we are, so we understand what we need to do to grow and improve. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jonathan, so as important as defining those variables in a tool that you may be using across those categories that we've talked through, it's also really important to make sure that for whatever the variable is, it could be related to training or external communications and accessibility, that how you define level 1 for each variable in that tool is the same across all the variables. And how one being typically on the lower end of the scale of maturity, not in 5 being what I call world-class, and almost unattainable today in the way that I look at and use maturity models. But a 1 has to be the same for each variable in terms of the kinds of things that you would expect to see in a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 for that variable. And Jonathan, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the levels before.
Perfect segue. Yeah, and again, consistency is really key here as well, right? We want a very authentic sort of analysis. We want a real baseline. We don't want an opinion. We want a real baseline established by subject matter experts. So maturity models often have 5 levels of sort of success, right? And as James mentioned, there really are no examples yet, but I'm looking forward to this, of the total 5, the highest level of achieving the number 5 highest level on the different maturity model levels. But let's start with the first one. And this is, of course, where we all start, the initial level. We call it the initial one, the first level. Often this is a company organization that has few services or initiatives that are inclusive. They're just getting started. There hasn't been much effort around it. They probably don't have that leadership buy-in yet. There's not many resources allocated to it. Sure, there might be some bright spots around, but they haven't been fully realized and capitalized on, right? This is the initial stage, and this is where we all start, right? Then the growth from the initial stage is to a more reactive stage, right? This is where companies and organizations start to begin to demonstrate improving capabilities and a stronger commitment to inclusion. I would say most of the organizations that I've reviewed maturity models for fall within the 1 and 2 range currently, right? This is sort of standard across the market. But again, when we move to level 3, this is where we see the much more proactive companies sort of sitting 3.5 and 4. So the third level is the defined stage. These are companies and organizations that have increasingly been driven by the standardization of processes, policies in place, detailed guidelines for inclusion. This is where things really start to click and where you really start to see the efforts around accessibility and inclusion start to pay off. And James, would you agree that most companies fall between that 1 and 2 range, and a lot of the leaders are around the 3 and the 4?
Sure. So it's interesting, and people get sort of wrapped around the axle a little bit with numbers and quantifying, which is the whole point of these maturity model tools. But I try to focus people more on the definition of what that is for a variable, as opposed to just calculating numbers. But yeah, in the dozens at this point of these assessments that I've done, that I've led with teams of experts, including with you as an expert in many of them, I have yet to see on any variable, any organization, a 5. And again, by design in the tools that I've created, 5 is today unattainable. It's world-class. It's future forward-looking for sure. I can count on one hand the number of 4s that I've seen at any organization for any variable on one hand.
And those would be the leaders in the space, right?
Absolutely. I really today, where we are collectively, I think if an organization is achieving a level 3, that defined stage that you talked about for a variable, that's good. But for the most part, I have probably seen in my experience in using these tools with different organizations, mostly 2s, and unfortunately, still a lot of 1s.
Right. It's a journey, right? And it's progress over perfection as well. And this is a tool that allows us to achieve that progress over perfection. So the 4th level is managed, right? Enterprise-wide approach to inclusion in services, technology deployments, and initiatives. Again, this is a very mature level. This is a company that embraces accessibility. This is an organization that's truly not only influencing inclusion around their own organization, but across the world and the globe through impact and partnership, right? And then level 5, which is our North Star, which is where we all want to drive towards and all strive towards achieving, which is this optimized level, right? Where the global leaders with an approach to inclusion in services, technology deployments, and initiatives. Again, the North Star, right? This is a company that's fully inclusive, that treats accessibility like a quality metric, like security, privacy, and performance, right? Something equal, not more, not less, but a true equal sort of variable to measure against. And this is where we're all hopefully headed. If you want to get there as an organization, the maturity model is a brilliant framework to help you figure out what that roadmap is going to look like and how you're going to get there. All right, so James, some sort of high-level thoughts again, just around these levels.
Yep, great overview of the levels, which are critically important, just like the substance of the variables is how you define the levels are. And really, those levels that you just walked through are the same for any maturity model. It doesn't matter what it's for, what topic, accessibility or anything else. I think in the accessibility and digital inclusion space, where I've worked mostly with maturity model tools, in addition to what you've defined, the kind of standard definition of these levels, the way that I think about maturing from a 1 to a 2 to a 3, 4, and 5 is a few things. The more consistent you are in applying whatever that good practice is. If you have a process in place for your development process and you're consistently applying that, or if you have a process in place for, like this university I mentioned, for buying accessible technology, and you know you're consistently applying that, that's one way that you mature through the system, regardless of what the variable is consistency in implementing whatever your processes are. Collaboration across departments in an organization or units in an organization. I talked about, these pockets of heroic effort, moving beyond a pocket of heroic effort. And that one, we all know that one sort of beleaguered person who's been slogging away on accessibility in their organization for a long time. Moving beyond that to a shared responsibility and approach to accessibility is how you mature through the 5 levels. I mentioned metrics. In applying those metrics for continuous improvement, quantifying what you're doing across all these variables and using it for continuous improvement is how you go from a 1 to a 2 to up to a 5. And then once again, coming back to budget and resources, that regardless of what the variable is, you're not going to go beyond a 2 if there's no resources for implementation, if there's no leadership support to drive a commitment to whatever that variable is.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I love also about maturity models, and I love a lot, is for me, a really good example of a maturity model is one that doesn't just give you numbers and metrics and results, but gives you strategy and low-hanging fruit to drive innovation to allow you to achieve that level of success at the next level of maturity. This is extremely, and also the partnership with external subject matter experts to help come in and do that scoring for you, to help do multiple things. One, give you a really unified sort of score of your organization from external experts who know what they're doing and talking about. And what's interesting, having been one of those experts in the past and currently, is it's so interesting how those experts almost always score almost the same number. Because once you interview and talk and explore and listen, it really becomes evident sort of where you are. And then also the steps to get to that next level of maturity. This is also about partnership. And again, you were talking about those sort of pockets of brilliance, right? How do you grow those pockets of brilliance out across an organization and out? It is through that partnership. And one of the things I truly believe, the heart of accessibility is partnership. And this is a method and a framework to grow substantially that partnership.
Jonathan, we're just being mindful of time. We've talked about why an organization would be interested in doing a maturity model assessment using a tool. We've talked about what they are, both in terms of the substance of the variables and also the levels of maturity. Maybe we can talk just a bit more about the how, the process, which you've actually started getting into a little bit. Any more kind of insights on, and what's great about having this conversation with you, Jonathan, is you've sort of been on both sides of this maturity model process. You've been an expert on teams that with me as we've assessed universities and other organizations, but you're also helping to lead a process at your own company. In terms of the process, any other insights to what makes for a good use or application of these maturity model tools?
With certain maturity models, one of the deliverables after the process is receiving a roadmap report. This is a high level, but detailed also report that basically outlines exactly what steps you need to take as an organization to achieve success with that next level. The roadmap report is extremely valuable. The ones I've worked on James with have been very sort of powerful with helping to get buy-in And I often think about accessibility, not about evangelizing and talking to people about the importance of this really, valuable space. It's about, that partnership and growing it across the organization.
Yep.
You are both awesome. I'm jumping in a little bit because we're getting close to the end of time, and there's a quote in one of the questions. This is pure gold. So there are a lot of really awesome questions, and I thank you in advance for your kindness in offering to follow up with answers to all of the questions after the fact. But I will give you a couple of them. I'm going to give you simple ones, I hope, and I'm just going to read them to you. Have you seen maturity models being conducted at the team level in large organizations and then reviewed and combined?
Love it.
Jonathan,
James,
yeah, I'd love to jump in on that. So what's great about these tools as well, and certainly as I've used them, is that they're sort of accordion-like. They're accordion-like in two ways. One is I've actually used them where we've sort of focused on a subset of the variables, but I've also used them in a way where we focused on a department of an organization. So for example, at one university here in the US, we only worked with the business school because they were on the leading edge at that university of wanting to be more accessible and inclusive for a whole bunch of reasons. And they sort of came to us, and the university wasn't quite ready to do it enterprise-wide. But I think that one department doing it, they get a lot of benefit out of it. But I think they also pulled their colleagues at the university level into wanting to do it. So I think you absolutely can apply these tools both with a subset of the variables and for a subset of your organization.
The brilliance is they're highly customizable, right? You can modify this process and framework to meet your needs. And that's, I'll say it again, that's also one of the things I love about this process.
I'm going to give you one more question, and it'll be the last question because we have a couple of minutes left here. But before I do that, there were a number of questions where people were yearning for specific information about different types of models and different situations. And so maybe when you go back to the questions, provide some of that information back to this group because they were really yearning for that. There were several questions specifically about that. If that's okay. I know that you wanted to be agnostic of models and not advocate for one or the other. And because of that, I think for you to just do that offline would be great, if that's okay with you. And then
Absolutely.
My last question is here, at what point in an organization's accessibility journey do you recommend first assessing the maturity level?
Now.
There you go, there's the answer now. Early when they're getting started, a little bit farther along. Any advice, any perspective?
It works no matter where you are.
You can't go wrong, right?
The sooner you can establish a baseline, the sooner you can measure your progress. That's why I'm saying now. Again, it's super hard to establish a base around accessibility and inclusion. This gives you a method to do that. And so I say now. James, what do you say?
Yeah, I agree with the enthusiasm, but forgive me, Jonathan. I will say that and I've worked with organizations at different points of maturity, and but if it's hard to do, I think, to really get the maximum benefit out of applying one of these tools. If you are a singular pocket of heroic effort, you can't sort of be examining just yourself. I think you need some level of either department-wide or enterprise-wide willingness to participate in the process. I know in the processes that I've led in the application of these tools, we sort of looked at a three-step process where there's some initial kind of desk research of documents. How is the organization, the company, what are their policies, what are their procedures, what are their guides, and then we put together an expert team to evaluate what we thought we saw in our desk research. But you really need some level, I think, of involvement from different players. But now for sure, but if you can get others involved in the process, it's going to be that much more powerful.
Awesome. Tilly, can I just say one thing real quick?
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. The fact that you tuned in to hear this discussion shows that you care. And that for me and for us is super important. I look forward to partnering with you all to create a most accessible, inclusive world possible in the future. And again, it is about that partnership. So thank you.
Absolutely. And Jonathan, to your point in the now, I've had a lot of conversations with organizations about, oh gosh, our scores are way lower than we thought they were going to be. And again, this is an expert team that comes up with this using really robust tools. And what I tell organizations, and this kind of goes to the previous question, is if you're even signing up to do this, you're in the top 10 or 20% of organizations in your sector or whatever, because you're committed to making improvement. So it doesn't, on some level, doesn't matter if you're getting lots of ones and twos across the variables, you're at the table, you're trying to drive change. And that's better than 80% of other organizations today. So I congratulate any organization that wants to step up, or department within an organization that wants to step up and do this and use one of these tools.
Jonathan and James, thank you very, very much. We know you're super busy. You're running around the world. Thanks for spending this time. Thank you for everyone coming here, and enjoy the rest of AXCON. Hope to see you there. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.